myself back because I'm a lady. What you
Hey, Miss
laughing
Connie.
about?
Connie. Miss Connie.
She's ignoring you. Got little.
Let's think
Did
about
you
it.
see that, or am I supposed to pass it on? Or is it just me? Is that just for me? Oh.
They have it. Call the meeting of the Planning Commission to order this October 16th, 2019. If staff could call roll, please.
Connie Coleman Lackady. Don Daniels.
Here.
James Guerrero.
Here.
Nancy Hudson Eccles.
Present.
Ryan Pearson. Paul Wegeman is absent, and Christopher Weber is excused. You have quorum.
Great, thank you. Before us, we have the minutes of October 2nd, 2019. Looking for a motion.
Move to accept the minutes as presented.
Thank you. And who second? Mr. Guerrero second. Any discussion or changes? Hearing or seeing none at this time. All those in favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the minutes passed as written. Any changes to our agenda by Mrs. Spear?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Under unfinished business, staff neglected to include just the closing of the public hearing on Title 18A that's been open since September 18th. So if that could be part of the conversation under that bullet point, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. At this time, anyone wishing, this is under public comment, anyone wishing to speak to the fellow commissioners and myself here on any topic, you're more than welcome to come to the podium, state your name and the city you reside, and we'll open up the public comment period at this time. Yes, Mr. Glenn.
Glenn Spaeth, Lakewood Historical Society. Sometime you ought to tackle graffiti. The Lakewood Colonial Center has been vigorously graffitied in the last few days. The clock tower has been covered. The internal brick building in the courtyard in the center of the complex has a lot of it. The dentist's office. The sock peddler was broken into in the last few days. Of course, the museum has had issues for a couple of weeks now with people invading the space under the theater in the old restaurant party rooms and up in the theater. The city requires us to have emergency exits for the theater so that anybody in the theater or breaks into the theater has immediate access to the museum. So this is creating some problems with our security. We're working on an alarm system. It takes a lot of time. It's going to be a complex system because it's going to require, I think we got like 11 doors, most of which has access to the downstairs and the upstairs, and getting to be a real problem. Anyway, I thought you'd be interested to know those kinds of situations are going on. We have cameras right now, but I don't think they catch much because you can't get into the areas that you're going to catch the people in. We cleaned out a whole mess of foodstuffs down in the basement area where people were camping or whatever. And anyway, thank you.
All right, thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Anyone else wishing to speak at public comment at this time? Hearing or seeing no one at this time, we'll close the public comment period. We'll move to number 6 on the unfinished business on the action on proposed 2020 comprehensive plan amendment docket.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, members of the Planning Commission. Tiffany Spear, Planning Manager for Special Projects in the Community and Economic Development Department. So in your packet this evening that was emailed to you last week, starting on page 6, you will see a memo regarding the 2020 Comprehensive Plan and Zoning Map Amendment docket. And you had a public hearing about this. You've had other discussion about this earlier this month and last month. But what we're going to do tonight is just walk through this one more time really quickly, and then it would be your evening to take action on the proposed resolution 2009-05, which is also in your packet. So where we sit is tonight, October 16th. It's scheduled to move to the City Council on November 25th and then take its way through a public hearing there as well. And then moving along action on December 2nd. And then between December and next spring is when staff would conduct substantive review of these applications. And then it will be back to you next spring with those recommendations for you to consider. If you remember, what we've got in this year's docket is 1 comprehensive plan text amendment, 1 privately initiated map amendment, and 6 city-initiated map amendments. You've got a vicinity map, and there's another one that's probably better, actually, on page 7 of your packet, but where these are located within the city. And then the text amendment, really quickly, just refers to the density ranges within residential estate and single-family residential districts in order to be consistent with what is already in the Lakewood Municipal Code. Then you have a number of map amendments, as I mentioned, 1 private, the rest are coming from the city itself. And these are all described again in the packet and in, the information that was provided online. So unless there's any other questions from me, we're ready for you to discuss this and take action should you be ready to do so. The resolution itself is in your packet, starting on page 19. And if you want to use the name of that resolution as part of the motion, should you be ready to do that, I think that will work for you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Guerrero.
So I'm the architect of record for one of the projects, so I want to recuse myself from this portion.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yep. Oh. Any other questions from staff or questions regarding the resolution 2019-05? And we do have before us a resolution of the City of Lakewood Planning Commission recommending approval of the docket of 2020 potential land use and text amendments to the Lakewood Comprehensive Plan, including the future land use and zoning maps of the city. That's what's before us tonight. Any question, or we're ready to vote? Yeah, I just want to know if you have any questions of staff at this time. So looking for a motion, if, yes, Mr., well.
I guess we have to have a motion before discussion.
Yeah, that's correct.
I'll make a motion that we approve the, what is it?
Resolution 2019.
Resolution as written, as
05.
recommended by the staff.
Okay, Mr. Wegeman has made a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Right, Mr. Pearson, Ryan, Mr. Brenstetter.
I would just, speaking on the council that would be receiving this resolution, note that the recommendation regarding the Springbrook neighborhood is, best way I can, am I describing it best way is the recommendation of the council is do something, but you're not recommend, but that the planning commission is not making a specific recommendation other than to say, this year you should do something. Because last year the recommendation was wait a year. And the way that it is worded, unless I'm not reading it right, it says do something based on the floodplain analysis, but it isn't, but the commission is not voicing an opinion in the resolution as written as to what you'd like the council to do. And if that's how you want to send it to us, that's fine. But if you recall, a year ago, there were like 4 options you might have recommended. one of them which was weight, which is the one you recommended and that the council followed. So I just would want to point out to that as you know, thinking that these are recommendations, that this is still a recommendation to act, but not a recommendation as to what action.
Yes.
If I could
That is
respond to
it.
that. The comprehensive plan amendment that Councilmember Branstetter is referring to is 2019-06, and that is within the resolution at page 27. But within the staff memo regarding this application, if you recall, we talked about the fact that since this was included in last year's docket, there was some work that was done by our our Public Works Department to hire a consultant to take a look at the flood elevations and flooding risks within this area. And there's been preliminary information that was provided to council in September. You have 2 of those maps included in your packet at pages 14 and 15. But there hasn't been a final decision or outcome from that mapping process come back to the city. And so the idea was for you to move this forward to the council to take a look at once they do have that final information, which is expected before the end of the year. So at this point, there's really nothing for you to recommend because they don't have all the facts in hand.
Any other comments or questions regarding Mr. Brandsteiner's comment? Yes, Connie?
So the one 2019-05 doesn't need to be approved?
Yes, I'm sorry, and that, it's a little confusing. Within Resolution 2019-05, you have a total of 9 separate applications for amendment, and one of them is numbered 2019-06. So the resolution has a number, and then each of the ones within it, each of the items have numbers as well. The resolution's numbered 05, the one about Springbrook is within that numbered 6.
So that means we would be acting on 2019-06 at the same time.
You would not be acting on 2 resolutions at the same time. You are acting on the recommendation for that.
Added in this particular
Yes,
one.
yes,
So actually, we are kind of sort of.
correct, yes. You're telling the council, take this up, consider it once you have all the information.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, Mr. Wegeman?
There's just always a lot of stuff here. It's hard to make sure you get your hands around the whole thing. So I guess as a group, we've looked at this and we'll either feel good or not feel good.
I don't think there's much to feel about because we don't have the answers really.
On that particular Springbrook one? Yeah.
Yeah. So should we make a recommendation?
Are you asking, or are you making
I'm
a statement?
asking.
You have to either say yay or nay.
Yeah,
So we leave it like it is, or we can amend this, right?
Yes, you.
If we were to recommend something, what would we recommend?
right. That's a good question,
Well-
because there's no definite decision of what to do with that piece of parcel at this particular time until they get further information down the road of that further information. Oh, Ms. Connie?
So if that's the case, then the amendment would be that we would approve 2019-05 minus 2019-06, which is embedded in that resolution.
That's certainly a choice the planning commission could make, but please note that on page 27, the language of it is to simply amend that map per the outcome of the mapping effort, of the flood mapping effort. So what you're doing as a planning commission is saying, okay, council, it's sat for a year, you're about to get all the information from your public works department, you make the decision what to do with this one, we're not ready to do that yet because we don't have all the facts.
Correct.
So you could either include that in your recommendation or take it out, it's up to you.
So that would be my amendment to the motion.
To take it out?
To take out, to approve the 2019-05 minus the 2019-06 because we don't have enough information.
So you made a motion to that?
No, I amended the
You
motion.
amended the motion to approve the whole entirety of 2019-05
Minus.
minus that Springbrook application.
If we have questions about it, why would we want to leave it in?
The reason being is because there's no answers, so why not leave it the way it's worded? Why not leave it in there and have the city council, once
We
they...
don't have a second, so we shouldn't really even the discussion on it.
Well, you're just amending this, it's a discussion time, so I'm just asking for a clarification of yourself, is that my thing is why take it out when there's no answer to those questions? And are we gonna wait until it's gonna come back to us? This is a docket of all of these amendments, all these things that are inside here, so I don't see a necessary reason to take it out, but that's my personal opinion.
Well, and I just for clarification, I wanted to amend it for us to have that discussion.
So the way to do that is you have to make an amended motion. We have to vote on that motion to change.
No, because it didn't get a second.
Can I ask
We
a
didn't get a
Yeah,
second?
yeah, no.
Oh, I
Please go
thought
ahead, sir.
Ryan
Yes, go
seconded.
ahead, Miss.
So if we accepted it as is, then when it got to the council, they would have the additional information to make their decision on that small piece.
Correct.
Just clarifying that.
Just saying.
So Connie did make a motion to amend the part of that Springbrook parcel, so we don't have a second yet on that amendment. Correct? Right? Is that correct? No second as of now?
There's
I
no
thought
second.
Ryan nodded his
No,
head
he
like a
didn't.
second.
No.
So if you're saying we didn't, then we don't have a second. So
Okay, all right. So we'll strike that amendment, and we go back to the resolution in front of us, the 2019-05. So we are discussing any other further discussion on the entirety of this resolution? Hearing or seeing none at this time, we will take a vote for this resolution 2019-05 to recommend to the council approval from the Planning Commission. So if staff could just call for a vote.
Connie Coleman Lackady,
Aye.
Ryan Pearson,
I,
James, I'm sorry, James is excused from this. Nancy Hudson Eccles,
Aye.
Paul Wegman,
aye.
and Don Daniels.
Aye. Passes. Thank you. Okay, we go back to our agenda, and at this time, the staff recommended that we have a continuance of the public hearing on the 18A. So I have we'll continue this process tonight, and we have a Gregory Bush, is that correct again? Come on up and go ahead if you wish to speak regarding this. Changes or additions or additional comments under this continuation of the public hearing on 18A.
good evening. My name is Gregory Bush. I'm with Wireless Policy Group here tonight on behalf of AT&T. And Wireless Policy Group's offices are in Issaquah. I'd like to keep it brief. I'd like to thank staff for their time and energy spent drafting and updating the code. I'd like to express appreciation for the changes that were made in response to our comments in the last few public hearings. And AT&T looks forward to providing improved wireless service under the new code. And I'm available if you have any questions.
Oh, great. I thank you. Thank you for your comments. We appreciate it. No questions at this time. Okay, no questions at this time. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your efforts. Anyone else? Tim, do you have anything additional tonight? Sure.
Tim Purrier, City of Tacoma business offices in Lakewood. Again, I'd just like to say thank you. I think the changes that have been made, the condition of the package you're going to review and approve tonight looks like it's in pretty good shape. I think it's ready to move on to City Council, so I thank everybody's efforts and hopefully we'll get this completed and we can all stop having to come here every week.
Enjoy your Wednesday nights, right? So, Glenn, do you have anything additional? So, okay, at this time, then, we will close the public hearing regarding to the 18A. We'll close the public hearing at this particular time. Thank you for everyone. And now we will move on the unfinished business to the discussion and action of the Lakewood Municipal Development Code, Title 18A, update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Give me just 1 second, please.
Yep.
All right, so we are here this evening with 18A, ready to go, we think, we hope. Within your packet, and I'll apologize ahead of time, the fact that you received not one, not two, but 3 staff reports on this issue over the last week and a half. But what you do have within your main packet, starting on page 34, is a staff report which includes a table that within it has responses from staff to various requests for amendment to the draft from James Guerrero, from, let's see, sorry, quite a few from James Guerrero, Tim Purrier, who just testified, and Dave Kruger. And then we also have a second staff report, which you have in front of you in hard copy if you didn't get a chance to view it electronically earlier this week. But this one has information regarding a question or request submitted by Commissioner Chris Weber, from recommendations from our city attorney, and then a couple of other items that came from other city staff. And then you'll see on page 5 of that second staff report what was mentioned as part of the small wireless facility, Chapter 18A95 amendments. And then starting on page 6 of your second staff report, you'll see draft resolution 2019-06. So if you are ready ultimately tonight to take action, that would be the resolution you would be taking action on. And then also stapled to that same document in front of you in hard copy, following that resolution, you'll see the third staff report. And this one just has, I believe, 2 items, one of which came from internal staff review on one of the tables in 18A40. And then you'll see actually one that is hot off the press. This actually came from a discussion that was had Monday night at the City Council meeting regarding the Shoreline Master Program. And long story short, there was a need recognized to address signs in the shoreline district or shoreline jurisdiction, just to make sure that the type and color and aesthetics of those signs were appropriate. And so what you'll see on the very last page here is a new subsection G to 18A100-010, and that is talking about making sure that the signs are compatible with the natural quality of the shoreline environment and adjacent land and water uses. So again, apologies for the 3 different documents, but you now have 3 staff reports with responses by staff to requested amendments, some of which the staff recommends approving, some approving in part, and some not to approve. And then you also have, as part of that big first staff report, the full draft text of not only Title 18A, but Titles 3, 12, and 17, which had some related amendments to them. Up to this point, you've had at least 5 meetings. I want to say we've had more than that. We've had the public hearing that was started on September 18th, and you closed this evening. This is the date scheduled for final consideration and action on the package. Excuse me. And then the City Council is currently scheduled to begin consideration on October 28th. The website's been live since last December, lakewood18a.org, and that has been kept up to date. So should anyone not able to attend these meetings, they have been able to get those materials on that website as well as the city's website. I just mentioned all of the things that's included within each of these staff reports. So that's in front of you either electronically or in hard copy. In total, between those 3 staff reports, you'll see responses to 39 different requests from various parties. There was recommended no amendments on 16 of those 39, and then recommended amendments on 23 of the 39. And then this is just a list of the various chapters within 18A that they touch. And there's also, because of the city attorney's request, now a proposed amendment to Title 1.36, which is the hearing examiner process. So here we are, and Dave Buer is here with me to answer questions that you may have, but we're at the point now of you either responding to the staff recommendations provided to you in those various staff reports, and/or if there's any other changes, amendments that you would wish to bring up yourselves and discuss, it's time for you to do so.
Great. And look at my fellow commissioners. Mr. Guerrero.
Yes, thank you. Couple of, well, maybe a couple of straightforward ones. On page 64 of our packet today has the parking stall sizes, and it deviates from the current code by a little bit. The difference is current requirement for just a standard parking stall is 9 foot by 18 foot, and this has it as 9 foot by 19 foot. And then as far as the drive aisle in a 90-degree parking stall, it is 24 feet down. It shows it at 25 feet. So I think those two are probably just errors in transposing them. So, let's see. So I have several items that I'd like the commissioners to discuss. I certainly have opinions on them, but I don't want to make my opinion the only one that gets presented. So for example, item number, so page 38, item number 7. I had a comment.
38?
Page 38, item number 7. My question was about confidential shelters, and I think staff might have interpreted my question to be about enhanced services. But so confidential shelters are, as we discussed, for people that have domestic violence or other issues where they really need to be in a confidential spot. They are allowed in residential zones, but it limits the number of people to 16. And I am absolutely in favor of having confidential shelters in residential areas. That number seems too high to me, and so I want a discussion on that. My thought is, there was a comment made that they might be using an apartment building. Well, that to me is several separate residences, and so if you have more than a standard family size, that makes sense. But in a single family house, my personal feeling is it doesn't make sense, but I want a discussion about that to see if I'm way off base there.
Okay.
Is it per unit or like an apartment complex? If you have, 10 units, does that mean you get 16 people for the whole building, or is that 16 per unit?
Yeah. That's the clarification that we have discussed this in the past as well. And I was in favor of Mr. Guerrero, as I thought that number was high than what the regular adult family home or another, especially the specially enhanced service facilities. Wasn't it, that's a little bit higher?
Enhanced services facilities is 16, and that makes sense to me, but it's not in residential zones.
Right.
But confidential shelters are allowed in single-family residences, for example, and that seems too high to me for a single house.
Yep, so maybe staff can just clarify.
And Mr. Buer is trying to do that right now. He's
no
headed
problem.
back to find the language in the code. The question is whether it's set by state statute or regulation, and he's just verifying that.
That's right, I think we did bring that question up, but I've never really heard the answer if that was state regulated.
So to clarify, what you're saying is my neighbor could have 16 people staying there that need to be hidden.
That's my interpretation of the way it's written.
Okay. Okay.
So if it was a 3-bedroom, you'd have more than 5 people to a bedroom, right? That would.
That's the way the math works,
Well, my concern is if there's 16 people there, you have 16 bad people looking for them that could show up there.
Yep, but there. So that's one question, Mr. Guerrero, you want to, while Mr. Buer's looking, we can come back to that if you wish.
Page 43, item number 14. And I mentioned this one before, so I just want to be clear on why it's a concern. So basically, what the code, the city is recommending is that when we have a cut, we don't go any steeper than 1 vertical to 3 horizontal. And so basically, it's a grade, a shallower grade than 1 to 2. So 1 to 2 would be 2 horizontal, 1 vertical. And the reason that I bring it up again is that in engineering, there's what we call an angle of repose, where we assume that soil can sit at about a 1 to 2 slope. And I think Ryan can back that up as far as a standard. And so if I'm grading a site, and engineering lets me grade to 1 to 2, but now the zoning code doesn't let me grade that steeply, I've got a conflict, right? So my engineer does it at 1 to 3, or 1 to 2, but now the city's telling me as the landscaper, if you will, that it has to be 1 to 3. It's shallower, now it changes the way I can manipulate this site. To me, it's not the end of the world, but I'd like those to kind of be consistent so that we don't have kind of two different
On
disciplines.
tight sites, it's nice to have a little bit of flexibility to get.
Mr. Brewer.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the actual code that goes through and lists everything. So it goes, you start on page 304, section 18A 4120.
He's talking about the first question.
Yes,
What page was
the first question.
Confidential shelters.
16 people.
Page 304. And there's a table, and it lists a variety of different types of special needs housing. Assisted living, confidential shelter, is that the concern? Because that's different than enhanced services facility. Okay. So it says confidential shelter, maximum of 15 residents plus resident staff, allowed in residential zones and some commercial zones, and potentially in the PI zone because that has relationships with Western State Hospital. But you'll note the number 5. So number 5 means that there's conditions that go with it. And that's found on page 309. And 5 says, the director may grant special accommodation to individuals who are residents of domestic violence shelters in order to allow them to live together in groups of between 7 and 15 in a single-family dwelling unit subject to the following conditions. And then there are a list of 5. An application for special accommodation must demonstrate to the satisfaction of the director that the needs of residents of the domestic violence shelter make it necessary for the residents to live together in a group sized as proposed, and that adverse impacts on the neighborhood from the increased density will be mitigated. So it's not a given that you're going to get 15. And more likely than not, if you're in a single-family residential zone, it's probably going to be capped at 7 given the size of the structure. And you go into next part 5B, the director shall take into account the size, shape, and location of the dwelling unit and lot, the building occupancy load, which is determined by the building official, traffic and parking conditions on adjoining and neighboring streets, the vehicle usage to be expected from residents, staff, and visitors, and other circumstances, etc. An applicant shall modify the proposal as needed to mitigate any adverse impacts identified by the director. D, a grant of special accommodation permits a dwelling unit to be inhabited only according to the terms of the conditions of the applicant's proposal and the director's decision. And this gets back to the Fair Housing Act and what is defined as special accommodation. If circumstances materially change or the number of residences increases, or if adverse impacts occur that were not adequately mitigated, the director shall revoke the grant of special accommodation and require the number of people in the dwelling to be reduced to 6 unless a new grant of special accommodation is issued or for a modified proposal, and that this is a type 1 permit.
So said another way, the limit is actually 6 without special accommodation, and that satisfies my concern.
Check.
So you okay with that?
I am.
Yes,
Okay.
very good, thank you. So moving then to page 43 of Mr. Guerrero's second question, and regarding the slope, whatever you technical term there, 1 to 2 versus 1 to 3.
Correct.
It's stating in this draft resolution that it's 1 to 3, but you're saying most engineering concepts are 1 to 2, in my layman's term. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and so 1 to 2 is what we call the angle repose with decent soil. So you could have soil conditions that wouldn't allow that steep of a slope, but in general, that's what we use as a baseline.
Okay, any comment regarding why staff as,
That was just a carryover from the previous code. We didn't make any changes on that, you know. And you know, my feeling is there are some really tight properties. 1 to 3 does make it a little bit easier, but my only concern would be that of a possible erosion issues getting onto sidewalks.
And this is only for landscaping areas, that's not the grading.
That's well, I have to go
Grading
back.
code would be different, and you would be able to get steeper with the geotech.
The grading code would be through the Site Development Ordinance, Section 12, Chapter 12A of Lakewood Municipal Code, which is more on the engineering side. This is landscaping.
Yeah, but the challenge there is that if you grade anything in Lake, so if it's not built area, we're supposed to landscape it, right? Any part of the site that doesn't have building or hard surface on it, we're supposed to landscape. And so if you've graded at 1 to 2, and I'm supposed to be at 1 to 3 on that area, I've got a conflict.
I'm not going to die on my sword for 1 to 2 versus 1 to 3. If the commission has a different perspective on that, that's fine.
1 to 2.
I'm going to defer to the individuals that have a little bit more, go ahead, Mr.
I guess the question is if you, shallower seems to make more sense, 1 to 3, for erosion purposes, but there's some other conflict here, and that's, I don't understand that yet.
And it is true, 1 to 3, shallower, you'll have less erosion. So the challenge, though, is that if we start with a site, it's got some slope to it, we've got to grade it. What standard are we designing to? If I give it to my civil engineer, he goes to 1 to 2 to get the steepness out of the site so we get a nice flat building pad. And then it's handed to me now, great, I've got my building pad, I've got to landscape this area that's graded at 1 to 2. How do I do that? I can't meet the code. And now I've got to change my graded area, which in effect changes my building footprint. So it's just it is, without them being the same, it makes a conflict for me potentially in the future that I'm kind of trying to head off now to say, hey, let's make a match. It could go the other way and say, well, no, let's not grade at 1 to 2, let's only grade at 1 to 3, in which case the engineering side has to change it. And that's not what we're looking at right now. We're looking at the zoning side, but.
Yes, Mr. Bueller.
We are neutral on this, Commission.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only referring and giving it back to the people that know a little bit more than myself. So if they have what I'm hearing is that they might have a conflict of, in the process of permitting and
And I would say I was unaware that it was in the code that way now, or I would have been having a problem with it. You know,
That I would mention too is on landscaping issues, when we get to this level of detail, there's discretion given to the director and the staff. And so I know that there have been occasions where we've amended this in order to get projects approved. But
okay,
well, if there's no more discussion, that's fine. We can move on to other ones, and then I would just make it as the motion.
So.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because that's the way it was before, we're going to just leave it the same way, or should we make a recommendation to change?
Well, I will make a recommendation to change, but I was just kind of going through my list.
Which way would you?
I would recommend that we allow 1 to 2 in landscaping.
1 to 2, because that allows you to use more of the land, but then how do you get the wrong kind of soil and you have erosion, so you get the building in there and all of a sudden you get these little places where people trip and those kind of things. So what do you do about that?
So just as a general requirement, commercial projects require a geotechnical engineer to do a soils report. So he or she should be telling us what the soil conditions are to begin with. And if the native soils can't sit at a 1 to 2, that should be identified in the report. So we should have some professional support right from the start to say, do or don't do this level of grading. And if his report says the soils can only be put at a 1 to 3, then the engineer only designs at a 1 to 3. And so then the landscaping, we do come in with topsoil, but it just sits right on top of the grade that's set at the subgrade level. It's not, we don't manipulate the grades at that point, so.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay.
Just more of and I identify more things as I kind of read through this, but on page 266, it's one of the tables. Related to the health fitness facilities, more just curious, so I see it show up in like the NC 1 and 2 for commercial,
I'm sorry, which facilities?
health fitness facilities.
Okay.
So we have commercial and then quasi-public, which I didn't look up the definitions of, so I might be speaking out of turn, but I see it in NC 1 and NC 2 for commercial, and then CBD and C2 and P1 for quasi-public. But I'm wondering why it's not kind of in all the commercial zones, for example. Or is there a reason why it kind of gets pigeonholed?
There was a mistake made, that's why, and Mr. Purrier caught it. And so as a result of some of his proposed changes, we've included that in the amendments.
Okay, so this, it actually gets included in more of the, okay. So earlier in the write-up here, it looked to me like there was, the drive-through piece was revised, but then on page 275 it's not. Is that it hasn't caught up yet with the language? So the way I was reading it now, it's that you need.
If you look in the second staff report. Sorry, where it? We're all going to go on a treasure hunt now. The response was given to both Mr. Kruger as well as yourself about drive-throughs, that there's now new language being proposed for that. And I think documents. Do you have my, you do? Sorry, Mr. Chair. Okay. It's recommended by staff to replace the drive-through language with new drive-through language, which is not included in the big packet in front of you, which was part of the first staff report from last week. If you give me a minute, I'll be able to find it for you and get it up on the screen.
I did see that. So the staff report that came out kind of trumps the big, but it just hasn't been put in the big language yet.
The big document, the fat one, is from last week, and so since then, there have been several more things looked at and updated as per the second and third staff reports.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Mr. Guerrero, continue.
Page, sorry about that.
No,
Just some good reading here. I just couldn't help myself. Page 278, and this is more just for my information. There's a category called minimum security. And it's conditionally allowed in a residential zone, R4 and then the MR1 and 2. Again, I didn't look up what minimum security meant, but I was assuming it's some kind of jail? Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing the question.
So minimum security institution
Yes.
is conditionally allowed in a R4 zone. And I guess I'm looking for what a minimum security is and why it would be allowed in.
Okay, that's going to be defined in 18A10-180 under the definitions section. On page 149, you'll see that that defined, publicly or privately operated living accommodations for juveniles with less serious behavior problems under the jurisdiction of DSHS and/or the criminal justice system, including state-licensed group care homes or halfway houses for juveniles, which provide residence in lieu of incarceration, and halfway houses providing residence to juveniles needing correction, or for juveniles selected to participate in a state-operated minimum security facility, et cetera. So again, that definition would apply to everywhere where it's included as a conditional approved permit across that table.
Okay.
A couple of things I would like to add. This is, I believe this definition and the locations of the zones comes, I believe, right out of our current code. The problem is the way in which our current code is written, it's difficult to find where these things are at. With these tables, now you have a better indication of where they're going. So again, this is an effort on the city's part to comply with GMA and the state requirements, but also placing some conditions upon this. I'm not sure that we've had any of these being proposed in Lakewood at this time. We're just trying to cover it. If there's concern that we've gone too far with too many residential zones, you can certainly make some amendments.
Not necessarily. I don't, understanding what it is, I'm not necessarily concerned. We talked about that one. And then just on page 352, on the lot sizes, there's just a typo. R1 should say 25,000.
Add a 0, yeah.
It says 25 or nothing. That's what it says. All right, we'll correct that. Thank you.
Okay, that was my list.
Wow, good job. Any other questions of staff on any specific portion of this at this time? Mr. Pearson, do you have a question?
I just had a question. Is there a lot of development in the floodplain now, the way the current mapping is?
In the Springbrook neighborhood, which is where we have now a 100-year floodplain, identified 100-year floodplain, you have a lot of existing residential uses. And up until recently, they were not considered to be in the 100-year floodplain. And it was only as a result of the newly adopted FEMA floodplain maps several years ago that they became a part of the 100-year floodplain. And then as a result of some additional studies performed by the engineering department, well, lo and behold, we have a much larger floodplain that now extends into more properties in the Springbrook neighbor and actually goes across I-5 where before it did not, and now includes some properties along Pack Highway. So those areas along Pack Highway and along Clover Creek, which were not in the floodplain, are now proposed to be in the floodplain, and that's why we're studying this. The development overall in the Springbrook area is pretty low intense, but that area also could potentially have a higher density as a part of the current comprehensive plan and zoning code. So there is some concern, why would the city build higher density in a 100-year floodplain? So we're trying to get additional information, which Tiffany's already spoken of, to see what's the best use to be allowed in the Springbrook neighborhood. But in answer to your specific question, there's a couple of single-family residences and what I would call low-intensity apartment complexes, many of which are elderly or older units, and we have some rental housing safety issues that we've been dealing with.
But you wouldn't get, like, I guess staff wouldn't be reviewing new permits that coming in for development in the floodplain. Mostly.
There is no
I was
more.
wondering how often that piece of code gets used,
Which piece of code? The floodplain code?
Yeah.
Not very often. Most of Lakewood's not in a floodplain. It was only until recently that this became an issue. We did get an apartment complex being proposed by a low-income housing group, and they did change the design of their project to meet the minimum requirements, but they didn't have the financial wherewithal to see the project. They have since been approached by another prospective developer who wishes to purchase it for industrial development. And their comments to city staff, and this is very recent, they're fine with it being in the 100-year floodplain and they can build around any particular issues. So again, that's very recent information. I would put it in the category of informal, and that's why we would like to get some more data before we make a recommendation. But I do suspect that we're going to be looking at some changes, and the same kinds of proposals or alternatives that were presented to you last year will likely be presented to you again this coming 2020 cycle, but you may have a more affirmative, a more definitive definition on recommendation.
Thanks.
Any other questions to staff regarding this? So we do have the resolution number 2019-06. It's a resolution of the City of Lakewood Planning Commission recommending the approval of the amendments to the Lakewood Municipal Code, Titles 1, 3, 12, and 17. Approval of the repeal and replacement of Lakewood Municipal Code Title 18A, and approval of the related Scribner and technical amendments to Lakewood Municipal Titles 1, 3, 12, 14, 17, and 18B is before us. Do I have a motion to send this resolution off?
I made my motion, I didn't get a second, so I can't make another one.
Or this is a whole different one. Don't-
I just sour grapes over here.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm looking for a motion to make this thing, huh?
Make a motion to accept as written?
Yes.
I make a motion to accept as written.
Thank you, Miss Connie. Miss Connie, Nancy Eccles. Thank you, Miss Nancy. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pearson. So we have a motion and a second, and any other changes or questions, discussion? Yes, Mr. Guerrero.
So I'd like to make a motion to amend that to include adjusting the 90-degree parking stalls to 9 foot by 18 foot and the drive aisle to 24 foot as one item, and the second item to be to allow the maximum slope and landscape areas to be 1 vertical to 2 horizontal.
Mr. Guerrero, could you please speak into the microphone? We're having a hard time over here.
So I'd like to make a motion to amend that to include standard 90-degree parking stalls to be 9 foot by 18 foot, and the drive aisles to be 24 foot wide, and a second item to allow for landscape slopes to be 1 vertical to 2 horizontal.
Okay, so we'll take care of that amendment, a motion to amend. So he's made that. Do we have a second on that motion of the amendment? Well, Mr. Wagaman, thank you so much. So any other discussion then on that amended motion? So Mr. Guerrero and then Mr. Wagaman, hearing none on that. So we'll look for a vote on those two, on that amendment. So all those in favor by saying aye? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. So we go back to the motion and second that we have before us, the 2019-06 on the resolution before us with the changes as Mr. Guerrero and Wagaman and all of us approved. So any other discussions or changes to this resolution? Hearing or seeing none at this time. Staff, if you could call for a vote.
Nancy Hudson Eccles,
Aye.
Connie Coleman Lackady,
Aye.
Ryan Pearson,
Aye.
James Guerrero,
Aye.
Paul Wegman,
Aye.
and Don Daniels.
Aye. Aye. Hearing so vote, it passes. Everyone happy and ecstatic? We thank you so much, and thank
We're
you
not
for
there
everyone
yet.
for all the input.
Let me just say a couple of things. This is a big lift. It's been difficult for staff to get this done, but I'm pleased that we're at this point. I want to thank the Planning Commission for this. We are doing a lot of different things with this document, not only increasing readability, but also making it easier for us to administer. A couple of other things. I know for a fact we will run into issues and errors and mistakes, and if they're fall into the category of minor and Scrivener, we'll take care of it that way. But don't be surprised if you see staff initiating some zoning text amendments in 2020 to look for any other things that are not working. I think we're 95% there, but I'm sure we're going to find new definitions. And I think there'll be more questions on special housing needs as well as transitory accommodations, which has not been resolved. And that's a pretty controversial subject. So those are some things to look forward to. But again, thank you for your bearing with us on a big document. It's not quite biblical. If it were biblical, it'd be 1,200 plus pages, so it's close.
Yeah, it sure is. Great. Well, thank you again, staff and everyone's with all their input. Was a tall task, and I think it's refined, and I think it will be useful for the individuals to try to maneuver and navigate through this. So, and thank you, fellow commissioners. Okay, we'll go on to new business, none at this time, and we move down to reports from Mr. Branstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As was mentioned earlier in the meeting, the Shoreline Management Program, which was a document that passed through this body a year ago, and then to the council and was updated and then was sent to Ecology, came back from Ecology after their review. And the really good news about that is that they found that it is, as a policy document, essentially satisfied all the requirements of what the review and update of that program should be to be able to go and do that. But they did have a handful, I think 7 is a number sticking in my brain, of things of where they asked if we would mind changing happy to glad in a couple of these things. There were a couple of items of where they just said there's a better WAC reference code where we had one, or it would be good to include one, and some things to be able to go and do that. And perhaps the one topic area that they made a recommendation on, which was the one that was most discussed before this body, had to do with restoration. And they recommended a change to some wording, which was really my interpretation of didn't change the meaning of anything that we intend to do with restoration, or with the idea that this body would have a role in continuing to monitor restoration. If you recall how that went, they just found a way to word it more. Ecology suggested wording it more concisely to be able to go and do that. So the council did a study on this document with the assistance of staff that I think my sense is that the council's going to follow the line of least resistance and approve an ordinance and send the whole thing back to Ecology saying, oh, thank you very much, we've changed it as you suggested, and then we'll have a final approved. And for those of you that will still be on this body in 3-4 years from now, you'll get to see that document again. That the council also has taken up a matter that you have already sent to us regarding or that it didn't come through you, but is a zoning amendment for the open space areas that are north of the current Western State Hospital, between Western State Hospital and Oak Brook, which is the idea of going through and rezoning them from open space 2 to open space 1. And the council's in the midst of the sequential process of public hearing and dealing with those. And is expected to take final action on that. We didn't really receive any input as yet of anyone that actually has any sort of disagreement with doing that. I think that so that is going to move forward well to do that. That I think the council members, when we had a retreat and we really discussed sidewalks significantly and of the fact that we really need to have an updated non-motorized plan that specifically called out sidewalks, that we envision building as a capital initiative over the next 6 to 8 years and be able to go and do that. I think we looked at that and there was general consensus amongst the council that that's something that we ought to do as we approach having really done the upgrades of all the major arterials or have a plan for all the major arterials, that sidewalk connectivity is really the best next major capital thing on the transportation side, rather than looking around for some other streets we can mess with, but really take a look at giving that the priority and achieve the balance between pedestrian movement and vehicular movement that the comprehensive plan really calls for us to strive for, to be able to go and do that. So I think that becomes a priority for the council to come up with. If you want to a sidewalk vision to be able to go and do that, and I'm not quite sure how that will move forward. I don't really have anything in particular. I know that there were a number of things on the code enforcement and abatement, dangerous building abatement theme that are in various stages of moving through the hearing examiner system and do that. And I think some of those are waiting on a hearing examiner decision. Some of them are waiting on respondents to react to hearing examiner decisions, and some other things. So those things are not static, but they're also not completely settled. So that hopefully in another month, there are some of those that have been long-standing concerns that we'd like to get something done with, that we'll know better the direction in which they're going to go. That's all I have, Mr. Chair, subject to any commissioner questions.
Any no other question? We'll let staff then do any final reports.
Well, I'm going to, under the category of other, I'm going to go through a quick list. Mr. Branster's already hit on some of it. We did get a decision from the hearing examiner on the Carwan Village abatement, which is a 38-unit mobile home park on 84th Street. Generally speaking, I would say the city of Lakewood got 98% of what it wanted. There is an appeal process underway. I think the appeal process expires on October 30th, at which time we will be contacting the property owner to make sure that he meets the requirements under the hearing examiner decision. Also, in regards to Carwan Village, I have a meeting with the Pierce County Health Department on Monday, in which case we will be talking about the hearing examiner's decision and what exactly the health department is proposing to do, because some of the units have been declared unsafe as a result of the failed septic system.
What property was that, Mr. Buer?
When?
What property was that?
This is Carwan Village Mobile Home Park. It's on 84th Street. across the street, if you will, from the theater complex in the vicinity of I-5.
Yep.
The other piece of information, we have 22 abatements underway, and where we've provided written documentation. Some of those are in process. We have a total list identified of 31. Some of them are very interesting and very difficult to deal with. We get into a lot of social service-related issues, and speaking of which, on the rental housing safety program, some of the situations that we have found in not only the conditions of the structures, but also the mental health or the living conditions of the tenants is pretty abhorrent. As a result of, we have been meeting with the social services group to assist us when we get into those situations to provide for a level of care that the city of Lakewood cannot provide. We've made contact with that group, and they're willing to do it at no cost to the city. And so that's a big win for us, and so the rental housing program is kind of expanding. The council will be receiving more information on this soon, Mr. Branstetter, but things are moving pretty fast, but I wanted to keep you apprised of that. Of course, 18A, thank you very much. Other issues out there, the Deja Vu business license, if you've been following that in the newspaper, more to follow. We also have a very difficult subdivision before the hearing examiner, Thornwood PDD, tomorrow morning from 11 o'clock until 5 p.m. We're working on the consolidated plan for the CDBG and home documents. There's some timelines that we are having to cover. And the last thing is, and the thing that you're probably most happy to hear, is we don't have anything else to place on the commission agenda for the remainder of the year. So unless Tiffany Spears says otherwise, you're on vacation.
I'm just on a high from 18A, so you guys get off easy.
That's
So
good.
I'm not anticipating any further commission meetings for the year.
Wow.
Wow.
So anyone else have any questions with staff? I do have a couple questions. I noticed a public notice sign at the DeLong's property, the hamburger joint right next to, no, it's a hamburger, but that's okay. Anyway, do you know why the public notice yellow sign is up there? And what's that?
I don't. I just know that the economic development manager has been working with the owners to figure out what kind of new use could go into that space since they retired. But I'm not sure of details.
We can provide you an update. There's just a lot of projects in play right now.
Okay, no problem. And I did read in the Suburban Times about the hearing examiner's decision on the QFC building, so that if anyone wants to read that, that's,
That was a very long hearing and took 2 meetings.
yeah. Yeah, see, there-
Testimony was interesting, I'll put it that way.
Okay.
I will tell you, our new building official did an outstanding job, as did some of the inspectors.
So the last question was, I've heard a lot of rumors, but then in the mail recently, the Bed Bath & Beyond moving says that we get a card that says we are moving. Any?
I will tell you that when Bed Bath & Beyond came into Lakewood in the town center, the developer said it was kind of a push to bring them there. And with the changing environment and retail sales and issues with the internet sales, I'm not surprised that they would maybe be thinking about closing that suite. I don't have any specific information on that,
No
but
problem.
from my history of the site, I think that the developer offered a special lease arrangement to get them there in the first place.
Okay, that's all I have. Any other questions to staff or anything? Ms. Connie?
So since we're talking about all these properties, so is the building across from Albertsons on Silicon Boulevard, is that going to be another Dutch Brothers?
Yes.
That will be a second Dutch Bros, and just so,
Bros.
Dutch Bros, they changed their name. Just so you'll know, the Dutch Bros here on Gravy Lake Drive was built by a contractor out of state from Texas. And we had some problems with him, plus he had to go back to Texas for a court appearance, so that slowed things down. This Dutch Bros off of Silicon Boulevard is a local Washington contractor, and we've had no issues whatsoever. That project is moving along very quickly.
Good. All right. Hearing or seeing none Miss Tiffany.
Sorry, one more thing. Just since this will be the last meeting of the year, just a reminder, in January, there is no turnover in the Planning Commission. All of you have terms that last into next year at least. The first thing that you'll have as action would be election of a chair. So whether it's continuing as is or wanting to change up leadership, just know that that'll be on your agenda in January.
Yeah. You also receive about that time a housing report, which talks about new residential development as well as plats and final plats to give you an idea on the level of plat activity that's going on in the city of Lakewood.
And for those of you that are interested in becoming the chair, the revisions that you help us make to the sign code now allow for you to proliferate temporary signs throughout. Or at least put one in front of each of the other commissioners.
Yeah, promote, yes, promote. Well, the seat is always open, I guarantee you, but, yeah, so, and hearing or seeing no other questions, we'll call the meeting adjourned.